Your journey has been an interesting one up to here. You've questioned so much more than those around you. You've even questioned yourself as to how you could have grown into these thoughts. Am I crazy? When did I begin to think differently? Why do people in general appear so limited in their thought process? Rest assured, you are not alone. The world is slowly waking up to what you already know inside, yet can't quite verbalize. Welcome to the Spiritual Dope Podcast, the show that answers the questions you never even knew to ask, but needed the answers to. Questions about you, this world, the people in it. Most importantly, how do I proceed now moving forward? We don't claim to have all the answers, but we sure do love living in the question. Time for another hit of Spiritual Dope with your host, Brandon Henley. Let's get right into today's episode.
Hey there, Spiritual Dope. I'm on today with a very special guest, Srikumar Rao. He is the founder of the Rao Institute and the creator of the pioneering course, Creativity and Personal Mastery. Srikumar Rao helps leaders around the globe transform their lives so that they can experience abundant joy no matter what comes their way. Dr. Rao is a TED speaker, author, and creator of the pioneering course, Creative and Personal Mastery. I'm going to throw a couple of pieces in here. Most of my guests would have found you probably through Mind Valley or the TED Talk that you and I were talking about. That's how I found you, to being hardwired for happiness. I'm so excited to have you here today. When Dr. Rao and I were talking here just a little bit before this, but Dr. Rao, I didn't tell you, there's that one question people always ask you if you're hanging out at the bar and you could have one person that you could talk to. I think you'd make that list for me.
I'm very honored, Brandon.
Yeah. So
you're in a minority, however.
That's because the word's not out, I guess, enough about you and what you're doing. Like I said, I always share your book with people who I think are along the way, whatever that means to them. So, Dr. Rao, how I like to start these out is you and I, we're kind of, source energy flows through us, right? And the idea is that, the universe speaks through us. And to specific people that are listening to this podcast or they're watching a video, what is a message that is coming through you today that you would share with those people?
The message that I like to share is that you are not who you think you are, which is a particular body, mind, intellect complex. You identify with that, but that's not who you really are. Who you really are is the omnipresent, omniscient, ever-present awareness that is beyond both time and space. And the biggest mistake that you made in your life is to identify with this particular finite entity and say, that's who I am, but that's not who you are. And it is your obligation to yourself to recognize that you have made this error.
That's a tough one, right? That's a tough one. So,
it's a very tough one. Normally, I don't go into this particular rabbit hole, certainly not this early and certainly not in public. But there's something about the conversation that we had earlier which said, hey, let's just do it and let the chips fall where they may.
100%. I love that you're bringing it up right there at the beginning, because one of the questions that I would have is that how do you recognize that, right? Even hearing that, somebody hears that, how do they go about rectifying that?
That is a very good question. And the short answer to that is it requires both a lifetime of effort and no effort at all. And if that sounds like a paradox, it is a paradox. And paradoxes are only resolved when you reach a higher level of consciousness than you were in when you created or heard that paradox. It's a little bit like the protagonist in the book, The Alchemist, which is a wonderful one. He had to go all over the world to find out that what he wanted was right where he was. So it's pretty much that way. We identify with this particular body, mind, intellect complex, but that's not who we are. And there are countless sages and, realized beings who have pointed out the way. One of the persons who's had a profound influence on me is Bhagwan Ramana Maharshi, who was an Indian sage who lived in the late 19th and early 20th century, mid 20th century, actually. He passed away in 1950. And he has written numerous books. His disciples have written numerous books, which are transcripts of instructions that he gave. So he is a phenomenal source, and he is recent. There are many persons who have observed and recorded his teachings at first hand. So something that he says at some particular point in your evolution will suddenly make so much sense that you'll stop almost as if you've been hit on the head with a hammer. And all of a sudden, it'll become completely clear to you. We have this mental chatter, which is this incessant talk going on in our head. What is this guy saying? Does it make any sense? What does it mean? I'm not the body. Of course I am the body. All of that is mental chatter. And it's always been with us. Mental chatter is like an unwelcome relative who's shown up at your house and you can't kick him out. But we tend to ignore our mental chatter, suppress it, work around it, do the best we can despite that. And that's a big mistake, because our mental chatter really creates our life. We think we live in a real life. We don't. We live in a construct. And we created that construct with our mental chatter and our mental models. And once we recognize that, we'll find, hey, if I don't like what I am experiencing, I'm going to go and change what I have created. And when you do that, you find it's possible to get to a point where every day is a blast. You get up in the morning, you're profoundly happy, joyous, not because something happened, but you are profoundly joyous. And one day you discover that there is no you and there is only joy. So that is a life journey, if you will, but that's the stages. And even a very cursory application of the kinds of things that I share in the book, Are You Ready to Succeed, will immensely, immensely improve your experience of life.
So the book that you created, right, and talking about these shifts and these evolutions, and being impacted by the gentleman you mentioned there, you went through physics, right? You were in physics, then you went to marketing, then you went to academia, and then at some point you decided that you needed to share this stuff out. You needed to teach this in the book, right?
It isn't so much conscious decision as an evolution, because I was profoundly unhappy with what I was doing. And professionally, I was a professor of marketing, and a great deal of what I was teaching, I really didn't believe in. Not in the sense that it didn't work. It did work, and I knew personally how well it worked, but I didn't think it was good either for the individual or society. To put it bluntly, I think a great many products are put on the market, which essentially, humanity would be better off, if we didn't have that. Do you really need Cheetos and many different flavors of that, and 14 different flavors of Coke, and, toothpaste? So a lot of creative energy, a lot of resources are being poured into stuff which is of marginal or even negative utility to society and individuals. So I had always been reading spiritual biography, mystical autobiography, and one day I came up with a bright idea. Why don't I take the teachings of the world's great masters, which incidentally I resisted for a very long time because I had a Western mentality, and I came from Missouri, so show me was very much a part of my ethos. And I said, there must be a lot of people like me, so let me talk to them not from, this is what you've got to believe, but let me talk to them from a viewpoint of, why don't you try it and see if it works in your life? And the thought of doing that made me come alive. So I did. And I created the course. It did well. I moved it to Columbia Business School in 1999, and it exploded. It was the only course at Columbia, which is a university-wide draw. I had students from law school, from business school, from the School of International and Public Affairs, from journalism, Teachers College, all over the place. And then it spread by word of mouth. So I've taught it at many of the world's top business schools, at Columbia, at London Business School, at Berkeley, at Kellogg, Imperial College. And now I teach it privately in New York, London, and San Francisco. Obviously, all live classes are temporarily halted because of the pandemic, but it's not going to be around forever, and we'll see what happens. I do a lot of corporate engagements, and I also have personal coaching clients, and I only work with clients who have a enormous desire to have an outsized impact on the world. They really want to make a dent in the universe. And at the same time, they also are aware that they are on a spiritual quest and they want spiritual growth. And many of them think that these two are in conflict, but they really aren't. And how to show them that not only are they not in conflict, but they play with each other synchronously and harmoniously. That's what my coaching is all about.
That's fantastic. I mean, again, like I told you at the beginning here, that's kind of how Spiritual Dope came about, this podcast, where it just said, hey, there's an alignment here that's much greater than if you were to just initiate personal will, if you will, right? So you can only get so far as a person, but how far can you get as a spiritual being? Right, is kind of the mental shift, right? You talked a little bit about the mental models. So that's the mental model that I've set up for myself that I try to share out via the podcast. You talked about mental models again as a construct. What would be an example of a mental model for you? If you could briefly.
Oh, sure. A mental model that I have is, there are people who are interested in what I have to say, so let me go put it out. That's the model. Now, understand that we typically tend to think of models in terms of good or bad, or right or wrong. That's the wrong way to look at it, because every model at some level is false. You push hard enough, you penetrate deep enough, it'll crumple. And every model at some level is true. Otherwise, it wouldn't have come into existence. So supposing you say the moon is made of green cheese, that's a model.
Right.
And at some point, there was a moon that was greenish and it looked to be, hey, maybe it is made of green cheese. But that's a model that'll crumple pretty easily, especially now with telescopes and people lining on that and so on. So the thing about models is, don't look at it and say it's right or it's wrong or it's true or it's false. The true test of a mental model is, does it work for you? Does it work for you in your life now? And if the answer to that is yes, you adopt it, you tinker with it, you make it even better for your personal circumstances. And if the answer to that is no, you drop it. So the test of a mental model is, does it serve you well at this stage, whatever that stage is? But of course, you're always looking out for data to confirm your mental model. And if you are doing that assiduously, you'll find that many mental models you hold do not serve you well. And once you recognize that, you drop it. You're always looking for a better mental model until you come to a point where you drop all models, period.
And one of the things that I realized reading about that in your book was just the idea of being able to drop a model, because we're so emotionally invested in our models that we're almost scared to let it go, even if it's not serving us anymore.
In fact,
another part,
you cannot drop a model.
What's that?
The model, you cannot drop a model. Models are like desires. Let's say you're a smoker. You can't say, I'm going to stop my desire to smoke. The best you can do is say, I'm going to abstain from smoking. But every time someone lights up, you see a cigarette or a cigarette ad, you'll say, gee, I wish I could have a cigarette. You can't stop that. In a similar way, you can't stop or drop mental models. The mental model has to drop you. The desire has to leave you. You cannot leave the desire. That's a very important point that I'd like to get across.
That makes sense. That's how drinking was for me. Alcohol. It just fell away.
Exactly.
No longer.
One day it'll drop away and you no longer have even the desire to do that. And then you know that you're finally free of that incubus.
And to your point, to be free of that incubus, it is very liberating.
Yes.
right? Very liberating. So I want to get back a little bit to the part where you were resistant to going forth with the course, and even before that, resistant to some of these ideas that you shared in your book. If I recall correctly, your mother's was fairly spiritual, and she would tell you stories, and you would resist the stories itself. Let's talk a little bit
Yeah,
about
not just
that.
twist it, but I'd come up with good counterexamples and feel very proud when I came across really good counterexamples.
Well, so what would what kind of things would she say to you, and what would your counterexamples be? And then, when did you finally accept those things,
Well,
if you
let me
ever
give
did?
an example. I think this is one that I mentioned in the book too. She would always look at everything and look on the what we would call look on the bright side. So, and many of these tales are, part of, I grew up in India, so it's part of Indian tradition, or the Hindu tradition, if you will. So there was a tale of a man, and he was just taking a walk, and he saw this great big watermelon, and it was rolling around in the field. And there was a cherry tree or a plum tree or something like that. And, there were all these fruits high up. And he said, isn't that silly? You have this tiny fruit and it's way up on a big, strong tree. And here is this huge watermelon and it's on a vine in the ground. That is silly. And then he went to sleep under a tree and a cherry fell on his head. And he looked up and said, oh, if that had been a watermelon, he said, and that was given as an example of God or the universe's wisdom in that.
Right.
I looked at that and said, yeah, okay, if that's so, what about coconuts and what about durian? At that time, I used to be in Burma, and durian was a very favorite fruit there. And the durian is a great big prickly fruit, exactly like a jackfruit. And, it grows on a tree high up, and it probably weighs around 20 pounds or more, and high up on a tree, and a durian drops on your head. You're not going to get up and start thinking philosophical tales. You're gone. And
Right.
similarly, a coconut, if it's encased in a thick fibrous shell, and if a coconut drops on your head, again, you're not going to wake up and start thinking philosophical ones. So I immediately pointed that out. And my mother shook her head and didn't say anything, because she knew I wasn't there. I didn't know I wasn't there. I thought that I just won a brilliant debating point, and I was very, very pleased with myself.
Right.
So that's the kind of thing. She was always telling me stuff which I was pushing back against. But something of what she said actually must have seeped in, because all of a sudden it came together extraordinarily powerfully.
Yep. So I mean, I had a very similar experience. My mother was always talking about being aware, and it was all about awareness. And as you were talking about earlier, I'm very aware. I was like, there I am, right there I am. I can touch and feel and see myself. What else do I need to be aware of? But 40 years later, it all kind of like a rubber band into the back of my head. It all finally made sense. And it sounds to me it was kind of similar for you, where all the things that your mother had been teaching you, at some point, boom, there it was. And
Yep.
did you ever reach out to her and say you were right?
Towards the end of her life, she got a sense of that. I'm really very sorry that she had passed on before I had just started teaching the course at Columbia, and then she passed on. So she never knew how successful it became, or all of the other things that happened after that. And, that's one of the regrets of my life. But then she is somewhere where she knows all about this anyway, because she's nodding her head and saying, see, I told you so.
So you'd be lucky if one of those durian fruits don't drop out of the sky.
Yeah.
She'll show you. One of the interesting things that I find about your book, a lot about it is interesting to me. But one of the parts is merging the spirituality and the material, and you talk a bit about how if you I think you were kind of talking about it with the marketing, right? If we're just trying to sell these things, there's another color of toothpaste, there's another thing of Cheetos. There's another way to do it, and I think that that's what you're opening up to right in the beginning of the book. You want to talk a little bit about like how somebody should approach it that way, like looking for material and spiritual gains for people?
When you're looking for spiritual gain, a lot of people think that it is separate from spirituality and materiality are two totally different things. But they really aren't. We are stuck in this illusion, and there's a Sanskrit term for it called Maya. And Maya manifests itself as the world around it. We're striving in this world of Maya. And it's perfectly possible for to use that striving as a mechanism for your growth. So let me share my view on life. And my view on life is the only thing you ever do in life is you work on yourself. And everything that is given to you is a tool which you use to work on yourself. That includes your job, your career, your partner, if you're in a marriage, your children, the work you do. They're all tools given to you to work on yourself. You use them as skillfully as you can. If you're an entrepreneur, you run a company, you want your company to be successful, you want your employees to be happy, to loyal, you want them to grow, and you try to be the best darn employer you can be. But in the process of doing that, what you're really doing is you're working on yourself. If you've got a wife, you try to be the best husband you can. But in the process of doing that, you're working on yourself. If you have children, you try to be the best father you can. But in the process of doing that, what you're really doing is you're working on yourself. All of these are tools. So the only thing you ever do in life is you work on yourself, and it is your job, your responsibility to use all the tools you've been given as skillfully as you can. But recognize that they're tools and recognize that you're working on yourself. That's what everybody does. Some do it consciously, some do it unconsciously, and those who do it unconsciously really make a mess of the wonderful tools that they have been handled. And sometimes they don't even know that they've made a mess of that.
Right.
That's
right.
okay. You are where you are. Yeah, so I invite the persons who come to my programs to recognize that they have some incredible tools and to use them with care and with skill.
I think that you started off this conversation with telling us, kind of who you are. It's your obligation to discover who you truly are because you're not who you feel like you are. And so that, to me, kind of aligns with what you're saying here. To work on yourself is to discover that piece. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Because I think a lot of people would interpret that initially as saying, I've got to work on myself to be more successful, primarily on the exterior. Whereas I think what you're saying here is...
There's nothing wrong with that, just so long as you recognize that that's simply a step on your path, and that's not what you truly want. If you talk to people, what do you want? What are your ambitions? Oh, I want to be president. I want to be CEO. I want to have a big mansion. I want to have a private jet. Why do you want all of that? And you'll find ultimately what it boils down to is, I want to be happy. I want to be happy, period. I don't want my happiness to end. I want to be free from suffering, period.
Right.
And it turns out that the only way you can truly be free of suffering is to realize that there is no suffering to begin with, because there is no person, entity who is suffering. And that's the only way you will ever reach a stage where you are not suffering, where you're eternally happy. So getting to the point where you recognize that there is no you who is suffering, that is what the great game of life is all about.
And you talk about that being a process. I still remember the first few times that I heard somebody say, trust the process. I was like, well, exactly what am I trusting? And exactly what is that process? My guess would be, again, that, this book is most of the process.
Lays it out. Absolutely. Are you ready?
Right. So
the portal to the rabbit hole.
What's that
Are
one
You
more time?
Ready to Succeed is a portal. It's a portal to the rabbit hole. You get down the rabbit
It
hole
really
and
is.
you decide how far you want to go, how deep you want to go. But eventually, if you go all the way, there is no you left to emerge.
Mm. Well, what's interesting too is you have a prerequisite to read this book and 7 others prior to being able to even apply for the creative personal mastery program.
Those are required readings, correct?
Right. How did you decide that those were the 7 books that were the filter?
They're arbitrary, and those 7 have changed in the course of my teaching it.
Okay.
And basically, each of those books was selected because it has the capacity to jar you in your thinking, that maybe things are different from the way you thought they were. So they've got a great capacity to shake you, get the machinery between your ears working and unrusted. So you see, maybe what I thought all along isn't really the way the world is. And that's a good start to entering into the Creativity and Personal Mastery program.
Yeah, I have a complaint because each one of those books was great. Right. I was like, well, this one too. How could this be so good? Right. So the recommendations, I really enjoyed them from the Creative Personal Mastery, standard reading. And then you've got in the back of the book, you've got just a 12-year or a 12-month reading list. And then I think you've got like a 12-year reading list if somebody was to go through the rest of the books in the back there. What if you were to rewrite this book today? Would you change? Would you edit anything? Add to it?
No, I don't think I would add to it. In fact, I'm writing another book right now, which will cover the same material, but it'll cover the same material in a much more direct fashion, as I started off our conversation with. In other words, instead of leading to it gradually, as I have done in Are You Ready to Succeed, I'll just come up with, hey guys, this is what you're really looking for. And this is it. And then discuss. It's going to be a short book. I don't anticipate it'll be very long, but it'll be, I think, a very pregnant with possibility. And my estimate is that there'll be relatively few people who are ready for that, but those people will somehow discover it, or it will discover them, and it'll be a great use to them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
My model may happen, may not happen. I'm fine either way.
Right. And you talk about that. There's a couple more points that, and these are all right in the beginning of the book, which I love, because you said while you don't dive right into the end result in the front of the book, you do set you set a stage. You set a really great stage for, here's kind of what to expect, and here's how to really leverage this book, which I really appreciated. And in part of that was just what you're saying there, to want something enough so greatly, right, that's all you want, but to be okay with it not happening.
Yep.
Right. Right. So talk a little bit about that, because we want these things so bad. How can we want something so desperately but be okay with it not happening?
That's a paradox, Brandon. So let me tell you a story which illustrates that. There was a sage who had 2 disciples, and both of them were wonderful disciples, very conscientious, very diligent in their practices. But both of them had an insatiable desire to know when they would become enlightened. So they were constantly pestering him to say, Master, you are all-seeing, you know everything. Please tell us when we will become enlightened. So finally, to get them off his back, he said, why don't you come to me on full moon night and I will tell you. And he was hoping they'd forget. And of course, they didn't forget. And promptly at full moon light, they lighted up. They prostrated before him and reminded him of his promise. He said he would tell us. So he talked to the first one and said, my son, you have been very diligent in your practice, and I am very pleased with your progress. You will be born 3 more times, 3 more lifetimes, and you will become enlightened. And he was physically dejected. His shoulders sagged. He said, "Oh, my master, I've tried so hard. And you tell me I have 3 more lifetimes. So woe is me." And he walked off disconsolate. And he talked to the second disciple and said, "Hey, you see the tree behind you?" And it was a mango tree in full bloom, and there were mangoes and leaves. And he said, "As many leaves as there are on that tree, that many times will you have to be reborn, and then you will become enlightened." And the student said, "That's all, master. You promised me that. I am born so many times, and then I will be enlightened. Oh, how wonderful it is." And he started jumping with joy. And the master said, "My son, you will be enlightened now." And he touched him on the forehead, and he was enlightened right there.
All right.
So it's very much a factor like that. It's an oblique answer to your question, because your question, in order to answer it, you have to reach a level of consciousness different from the one where you created it.
Mm-hmm.
But there is both immense striving and effortlessness. That is the thing that people find most difficult. Here's the paradox. Many teachers, including the Buddha, said human life is rare, and in human life, the desire for enlightenment is rare. So do not waste a second. Time is too precious. Work, achieve enlightenment in this very birth. And at the same time, things happen when they happen. The flower blooms when it is time. The fruit ripens in the correct season. And there's nothing you can do to hurry the process off. So the two are in contradiction. But they really aren't in contradiction. They are, as I said, a paradox, and paradoxes are only resolved when you go to a higher level of consciousness. So these are things that you cannot talk about logically, but you will intuit that both of them are true, and you're not only at peace with the ambiguity in the contradiction, but you can embrace the contradiction. That's what my course is all about, helping you recognize it's not either or, it's both.
And again, I appreciate the course too, because you can, and this has been my experience so far. I told you at the beginning here, I'm reading it for the 3rd or 4th time, and it's a totally different book this time than the first time I read it. And the first time I read it, I'd have to say that it was primarily for personal success gains. Right. Right. Am I ready to succeed? You bet I am. Let's do this thing. Absolutely. And as my evolution has come to be about is I don't think that I'm fully there, but there's the idea that the merging, right, and understanding that I do these things with great effort, but if I do them in alignment with kind of a joy, or again with this podcast, bringing something to others, to be of service to others as well as myself, things open up differently. The world opens up differently in a different way. Now, I'm just curious, did that happen for you when you created this course, and is that when you kind of first recognized it?
Sure. Before I go there, let me also share with you that the paradox that I outlined to you has many parallels in the hard sciences, physics. I used to be a physics major, as you pointed out. So, for example, we still have not been able to reconcile what we call the wave-particle duality. Is light a particle, or is light a wave? And it exhibits characteristics of both. So we've got a name for it, the wave-particle duality, but we haven't been able to resolve it. Right. It's exactly like that. You can use both, and at certain times one is appropriate, and at other times the other is appropriate, but they're both true. So coming back to my own life, yes, I am discovering that a lot of things that I tried hard and struggled to make happen, I don't struggle anymore. I do make effort, I put it out there, but even the effort doesn't seem like effort because I'm doing it because I'm called for. I don't pay any attention to deadlines because most deadlines are completely artificial. And, if I happen to meet it, fine. If I don't happen to meet it, I don't beat myself up. It'll get done when it'll get done. So I'm letting life evolve as opposed to trying to force my will upon the universe, if you will.
Right. I enjoy that, and I think that the other story that you tell in the book is how the one was looking for enlightenment or something of the sort, and the master tells him 10 years.
Yeah.
Right. And he goes, well, what if I double my efforts? And he goes, 20 years. Right. And it's crazy because that's helped me to just kind of slow down a little bit. Right. That story in of itself is just inclusive, and it's right in the beginning too, which is,
Right.
again, the book is set up very nicely for anybody who's kind of looking to do the self-discovery journey. Right.
Exactly correct. Yes.
So I'll ask you this question. I don't think it's too tongue in cheek, but would you consider yourself along the lines of a guru?
No.
Not at all. So,
Oh,
okay.
I do consider myself a person who's been chosen for whatever reason by the universe,
Mm-hmm.
transmit some great truths.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to emphasize, and I state that in the very beginning of the book itself, these are not coming from me, these are coming through me, and they are the transmission of tremendously powerful enlightened masters. And I have probably introduced distortions in them because of by being the imperfect human being I am, but I consciously try to introduce as few distortions as possible. But if there are distortions, it's all mine. If there's any power, it's all theirs. And that's just a statement of this is the way it is.
That's fair. Teaching this to your children, being a father myself, right? I've got a couple children, and I know that you've got your children and grandchildren along the way, right? How do you try to prevent them from kind of our mistakes, right? Waiting till the end of our lives or midlife. How can they
That's
know
a very
this?
good question. And I don't think you can. Each person has to have his or her own life journey and make their own mistakes. And a lot of the things that I see them doing, I can recognize this is not the ideal, but there's not a damn thing I can do about it. And I don't even try because they're on their own path and their journey of growth. And my mother must have shed many tears when she saw how her son was turning out, but it all worked out in the end. So sure. I'm not shedding any tears, all of that is available. And at some point it will become relevant, and what is relevant, they will pick up, but it is what it is. So I try to be supportive. I try to inject this at appropriate times, or what I think are appropriate times. But I don't have control, and I don't beat myself up on that either. It is what it is.
Right. And one of the books that I thought that was really interesting that you shared was the creative the Stanford course, right?
And creativity in business.
Yes. And I thought that it was really interesting too that who's it? Jim Collins was came out of that course. But is that where you got the VOJ from?
The VOJ, probably I did pick up from that. And actually that book was instrumental in my creating my course, because I thought if Michael Ray can pull that off at Stanford, I can pull this off at Columbia. And I did. So he was an inspiration, and he was very supportive of me, by the way. We were in touch for a long time after that. And he said, thank God that you were keeping the flag floating, because the very year that he retired from Stanford, that course disappeared.
Interesting. That's interesting. And I bring that book up because when I read it, of course, it wasn't what I expected it to be, right? Mm-hmm. Very similar to your book. There's a lot of, universal wisdom in it,
yep.
Right? And I guess, it's great to see that was the inspiration for you, because again, that's this podcast is to show others that there is a different path that you can kind of go along, that there's people that who have gone before you, that have been able to kind of figure it out, right?
Yep.
And put it together.
These are the signposts along the way, and they're encouraging people who are coming, saying, yes, there are others who felt the same way. And maybe they discovered or said something that I can use to help me in my journey.
Right. Right. Well, Dr. Rao, I don't have anything else really top of mind except for, a big thank you for coming here today. I know that your time is limited. I've really enjoyed having you on. Where should people go to kind of find out more about you and what's next for you?
They can go to my website, which is www.therawinstitute.com, or they can email me directly. My email is my full name, Srikumar Rao@gmail.com. And if they go to my website, therawinstitute.com, and click on the button which says join our community, they'll get information. They'll be on my list to get my blogs, and they'll also get information about my programs.
Fantastic. Thank you for being here today.
We really hope you enjoyed this episode of the Spiritual Dope Podcast. Stay connected with us directly through spiritualdope.co. You can also join the discussion on Facebook, Spiritual Dope, and Instagram at spiritual_dope. If you would like to speak with us, send us an email through brandon@spiritualdope.co. And as always, thank you for cultivating your mindset and creating a better reality. This concludes the most thought-provoking part of your day. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay fully up to date. Until next time, be kind to yourself and trust your intuition.